We barely know anything about the Krorks, or do we? There's actually a surprising amount of references, sources, quotes, and even in-lore encounters with these massive green brain boys, as the Orks likes to call them, that show what they might have been really like, and give us some juicy details on how strong, smart, and technologically advanced this super species was. For those that don't know, a Krork is the massive green-skinned forebear of the Orks that we love or hate today. Instead of rioting and having a scrap for fun, they were said to be geniuses, technologically advanced without equal, bar the Necrons, and apparently even killed gods with only a couple thousand of them engaging in every battle during the War in Heaven, which happened about 60 million years ago and started the entire 40K setting. But that's a video for another day. But how powerful is a Krork really? Compared to the Emperor, a Primarch, hell, even a Space Marine, would these warriors of the heavens absolutely obliterate them all? Or are there some other important details that we are missing here? Well, first off, we have kind of seen Primarchs fight Krorks during Meulen, right? Well, no. The beast, that one orc that nearly killed the Emperor, yeah, that was just a Primarch, a mere in-between step of Krork to lowly orc. Krorks are just something else. They are not even considered to be outright orcs. They are the toughest, biggest, and meanest bastards around. They are literally taller than Primarchs, standing at over 12 meters tall, or 40 feet in freedom units. We don't know much about them, but from what we know about orcs, the bigger they are, the tougher they are. And if Krorks on the regular are bigger than even the Primarchs, then how the hell could anyone other than the Emperor be able to beat them? Like, let's just say a single Krork fleet of these guys re-emerged after getting stuck in the warp for millions of years after the War in Heaven. Who could even stop these guys? Well, we are gonna cover that and a whole load more in today's video, examining every canon source we have about the Krorks, and see if there's something more than meets the eye for the average 40k reader. And let me tell you, this video has some of my favorite excerpts I have ever found in the entire setting, and I have done over 400 excerpt shorts. Alright, enough yapping, let's get into the video. To start off properly, I think it's paramount we first understand what the Imperium, us, humankind, knows of the Krorks from our own history, and details we have been able to gather from probably thousands of Orc prisoners. We find the following quotes in the Orc Codex 2nd edition and WA Orc books. Imperial scholars have speculated that on the Orc world of origin, wherever that might have been, some even say Ulanor, there existed an ancient race that was indirectly responsible for the spread of Orcish society. Difficult as it is to believe, this ancient race was extremely intelligent and rose to dominance over the other Orcish races in just a few generations. They understood and developed technology and even created the legendary, and summarily lost, Orc standard construct templates. It was this race, historians argue, that must have initiated the Orc expansion into space. Now, a physically underdeveloped slave race, the Snotlings are thought to be the only living remnants of this lost race. The sudden rise of super intelligent Snotlings can only be explained as the result of a catalyst. Snotlings are symbiotic with fungi, which they cultivate and eat. It is believed that these fungi grew in the underground cave systems of Orcoid culture and caused genetic mutations in the brain of these ancient Snotlings. The Snotlings raised the fungi for food. Over generations, a diet of this fungi stimulated the growth of the Snotling's brain to its full potential. Later, this fungi was cultivated by the mentally enhanced Snotlings. According to legend, the intelligent lost race of Snotlings, known as the Brain Boys, were still diminutive. So they bred a race of less intelligent beings, but tougher, larger and more brutal creatures to do their work and fight their wars. These were the Orks and the Gretchen. Gretchen represent an intermediate stage in the development of Orks. The Orks were put to work cultivating the fungi. Unfortunately for the ancient Snotlings, the Orks also nibbled at the raw fungi as they collected it. Their masters took no notice, unaware that their own intelligence was the result of this peculiar diet. Over a few generations, the Orc brain was enhanced enough for the Orcs to rise up and overthrow their weak masters. The Brain Boys were enslaved and allowed only a small amount of fungi. Slowly, they began to regress to a Juveline level of mentality, even by Orcish standards. However, the Orcs neglected the cultivation of the fungi, and eventually it died out. As the fungi became less abundant, the Orcs also began to regress. By this time, the greatest advances in Orc technology, culture, and expansion into space had already taken place. Gradually, the Orcs reverted back to a lesser mental capacity that was nevertheless superior to the original state of the Brain Boys. Thus, they remained dominant. This is the situation that persists to this day. It is difficult to reconstruct the face of Orc history in any precise detail. Like most Orc history, the story had to be pieced together from fragments of Orc legends, which have only passing references to Brain Boys and give only brief glimpses of a time when the Orcs were not in control. 12 years later from this source, with the introduction of the Necrons and the War in Heaven as the foundation of the setting, this was all changed. The Orks, originally known as the Krork, were suddenly a creation of the Old Ones, made to fight the warp entities that started invading reality after the war devastated the cosmos. Codex Necrons 3rd edition. The denizens of the warp clustered voraciously at the cracks between dimensions, seeking ways into the material world. The Old Ones brought forth newer creations to defend their lost strongholds, like the hardy green-skinned Krork and the technology mimicking Yokaro. But it was already too late. The Old Ones' intergalactic network was breached and lost to them. The greatest work and places of power were overrun by the horrors their own creations had unleashed. After this source, however, we got very little info on the Krorks themselves, but a few more incredibly important sources came later. For example, 2 works by Guy Haley in 2013 to 2016 mention, directly and indirectly, the ancient race. It's implied that the Krorks' degradation was a desperate attempt to survive. Baneblade 2013. Green Eye did not know it, but his anger was born from fear. The fear of a race which died millions of years ago. A fear that drove them to grasp at any means of survival, in no matter how debased the form. That fear flared in him now as the shell continued on into the Gargan's armor, smashing through it and exploding inside. Later, Trazin's gallery shows the only proper Krork we have seen yet, a being taller than a 10-meter tall beast that emerged in M30 and beat the Emperor to a near pulp. So for context, Korrak and Scalagrim get shown around by Trazyn the Infinite in his collection on Solomons. In the book, Fabius Bile, Clone Lord. "That is the largest orc I've ever seen," Savona muttered, staring up at the towering 12-meter tall monstrosity that loomed in a nearby nook. "And his weaponry!" The frozen creature wore a crude exoskeleton far in advance of anything the orcs now might conceive of. Indeed, from his initial examination, Fabius suspected that it might be in advance of his own battleplate. "A Krork," he murmured. "One of the first orcs. I read about them in the Eldari text. I have long theorized the orcs are a form of organic weapon system, a rogue biological agent, unleashed during some ancient apocalyptic conflict. There's too much about their internal workings that seem designed, rather than evolved." "We killed them easily enough at Ulanor," Scalagrim said. "Nothing that big, I'd wager," Korrak gurgled. Before we continue, I have a little side tangent about this particular source. The characters saw one singular Krork in Trazyn's collection. Trazyn is such a well-known collector, displaying one Krork by itself, which most likely means it's some form of special Krork. Like, in all honesty, the one Krork in Trazyn's collection isn't just gonna be some random pleb Krork. It's probably the Alexander the Great of Krorks, the Tamerlane of Krorks. The thing is probably one of the most impressive specimens of Krork you could hope to come across. Thinking that it's representative of the entire species is like 60 million more years passing, and long after the extinction of humanity, someone assuming that the Fulgrim clone is just what regular humans look like. But there is also a chance it's the following. Trazyn will cut corners and go for the next best thing if he can't find an original, or for something he already has at hand. So there is a chance of the Krork being a remarkable specimen, but there's also a chance it was a big soldier and he placed it as a stand-in for a different, more important Krork. But what about those Primarchs? Are those like Krorks, or a little different and way weaker? First, let's look at Vulcan fighting one of these beasts, as seen in The Beast Must Die. At the moment of entry, Vulcan felt the overwhelming nature of Ulanor pouring onto him. He witnessed and participated in the unimaginable orcishness of Ulanor, feeling himself drawn out in a web of Wa power stretching across many star systems, the pulsing tendrils feeding back into his being, even as his presence radiated energy into those around him. That power echoed back throughout time, past the Horus heresy to the primordial origins of the Orks themselves. He was one with the nature of the Orks, and saw for the briefest moment 2 green-skinned behemoths battering each other with bare fists at the dawn of time before even mankind was born. The sensation of something around his throat dragged. Vulcan went back to the present, staring into the rage-filled eyes of the great beast. Both claws were on his throat, squeezing the life from the Primarch. Having seen the nature of the Wa force the bounty orcs together, guessing at its nature from his own dark experiences of chaos, Vulcan was struck by a revelation. All things were interconnected. The orcs seemed random, but they were not. They were emergent. Trial and errors always began with wildness and accidental circumstance, but it was honed and refined. It evolved. As the orcs had hyper-evolved in the accelerating presence of the great beast, so their strategy had evolved. From Gargants to Hulks, to attack moons, to Ulanor itself, a progression that, once revealed, could be followed back to its base in the most simple of orc constructions. And the same was true for all their acts, learned through action, trial and error. The attack moons were not battle stations, or at least not merely battle stations. They were test shots, dry runs sent out into the void as the Orks tinkered and improved their graphitic engines. And once the technology had been proven, they needed to find a target. The great beast had not struck early, it had struck a bargain. It would avenge the abuse spirit of the Orks. It would crush the emperor that had humbled Orkdom. On the crescendo of such a victory, its power would be unlimited, and it would ascend to rule over the galaxy. This excerpt shows us that, in reality, the Krorks were not super smart. They trialed and errored their way to success. In a way similar to the normal Orks we know today, but also done on a scale much larger and way longer than just a couple thousand years. Don't forget, the War in the Heavens lasted 5 million years, compared to, for example, the Great Crusade being only 200 years, or the Horus Heresy being closer to only 1 decade. They are an inventive species, with a drive to survive. They respond to their surroundings and skill their powers based on what's thrown at them, just like a fungus in real life does. Them beating the Necrons for thousands of years was a culmination of millions of years of prep, response, trial, error, and probably millions of dead Krorks. But what about the perspective of an Ork in 40k when they look at the Krorks? A scene from Akari, Gaskell Traka's lucky little helper, in the book Prophet of the Wa. The Orks kept coming and they kept getting bigger, until even the runs among them were as big as the warbosses of Urk. And above it all, way up, on what it might have been the cavern roof or might have been infinity, the stars were coming out. More stars than every mech on Urk could have counted in a lifetime. And every one of them was bright, angry, and beautiful green. I was so distracted by the stars that I didn't see the squigget. It was a brilliant thing, a horrible thing, as big as a battle wagon it was. And it made the skinny, sack-throated beast raised by Urk's snakebite herders look pathetic. It nearly smashed me to mush with its foot. But I didn't live to 3 years old by not being able to roll out of the way of a stomping morgue sniff fast. And once I was on my feet, I followed the beast. I don't know why, but it felt right. Soon there was a whole herd of squiggets, lumbering along at something like a gallop, and barging each other with enough force to flatten fords. I ran along with them through that untamable garden, and I didn't care if they stamped me flat, cause it felt like fear wasn't something worth feeling in this place. Up above now, where the green stars shone, there were warriors, huge Orks, perfect Orks, even one bigger than a clan chief, and rippling with green light. I don't know how I knew, but they were Orks as they were meant to be. They glowed bright enough to outshine the stars, and as they strode throughout the sky, I could feel the gods above them grinning down in violent pride. Then clashes and booms and roars started coming up from ahead. The giants were wading into a scrap. So current day Orks definitely look up to these Krorks in a way, seeing them as mythological creatures of their society. The same way we used to feel for Odin and Thor. But we have another beautiful example from the good old Talker the Mad Boy, the educated Ork, as seen in Engine of Marc. For context, Talker is a mad boy with some kind of strange mutation. However, rather than driving him insane, it seems to have made him extremely intelligent. Bosgrad, an Ork mech, fixed his power shuns. He jiggled switches in the belly of the Stompa until his pusher beams intersected the precise right way, and pushed so hard a tiny bit of hot stuff collapsed in on itself and the little sun ignited in its reactor. Steam hissed from the trio of magnetic field generators that kept it stable. The grots looked nervous, but it held, and the tiny sun didn't go anywhere it shouldn't. Higher resistance is to be expected in copper compounds of lower purity, said Talker. Somehow, that made sense to Bosgrad, who reached for better wire. Then he changed his mind and began to cobble together a cooling system for the main power lines, leading from the fusion plant to the secondary systems out of some scattered pieces of junk. Talker wittered on endlessly, snatches of ancient natural history and gunnery techniques tumbling out of his mouth. He bobbed backwards and forwards in the mecha cannon's gunner chair. Mad as he was, he reaped a high score of Tau. What to take away from Talker? The Krorks of old had their tech branch encoded in their DNA. Whether this tech was instilled into their genomes by the old ones, or whether the Krorks of the past had some way of doing it themselves is not clear. Number 2. Krorks had the concept of friendship, something that completely confuses Talker's fellow Orks, as he calls them brothers and friends at one point in the series, and they look at him like he grew a third eye. And number 3. Ancient Krorks were incredibly accurate and effective with long distance ranged combat. Even by using only the notoriously inaccurate cannons of a Gargant, Talker employed artillery bombardment principles to rack up an incredible kill tally against invading Tau forces from a distance. You know, the notoriously mobile and long-range Tau. Yeah, he was out shooting them. But we can't finish this video and all the excerpts without looking at what their enemies think of the Krorks. Let's look at old takes from Twice Dead King, Ruin, when he fights the Orks for the first time in millions of years. The orc was trying to stab him now. He looked down at it in something like disappointment. It was hard to believe these things had been designed during the Old Wars as a counter to Necron supremacy. Once, Oltix had felt insulted by that. Now he felt ashamed, because in the case of his dynasty, one of the brightest lights in the Western reawakening, it was working. There are a couple more passing mentions throughout the books, but in reality this is the meat of what we know. This is nearly every source written about them so far. To finish it off, I'm going to throw the Krorks into my How Powerful is X Gauntlet and give them a rating from 1 to 40 Warhammers. 1 being a guardsman, 10 Warhammers being a space marine, and 40 Warhammers being the Emperor of Mankind himself. As usual, the disclaimers of power levels can't always be taken at face value. The lore is made of stories, and the stories are not beholden to power levels. Krorks are relics of the distant past. The greenskin race has fallen harder than humanity after the Dark Age of technology, and perhaps even harder than the Eldar, as their genetically encoded science and technology barely whisper through. But they're also a threat. If the Orks began to win in such a way that Primarchs became common once more, perhaps then the Krorks could begin to re-emerge. Such an event would be the end of the Imperium. Both the reawakened Gilliman and Lionel Johnson would stand an ill chance of even besting one of them in direct combat. We have seen Primarchs, which are a natural step between Krorks and Orks, handily beating Primarchs in combat, unless the plot needs it otherwise. Don't forget, we saw a really large Primarch even shake the Emperor to near death, only to be beaten by a moment of distraction from the swing of Horus Lupercal. I'd be hard pressed to give them a proper power level that even fits it all in the scale. So for completionist's sake, I give the Krorks 41 out of 40 Warhammers, with a Primarch probably reaching closer to around 30 Warhammers. But that does it for today. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive on the Krorks, and that it gave you some extra info on them that people like to conveniently leave out during discussions when it comes to the green gods of old. Also, quick note, we have no idea if there is a connection between Gork and Mork and the Krorks. Maybe it was just 2 really angry Krorks that entered the warp to beat the Chaos Gods up. Maybe that's why Khorne is described to have multiple scars on his blackened armor. Who knows? Anyway, thank you all for watching, like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please let me know your suggestions, ideas, comments and other things down in the comment section below. And I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.